So I'm in Bendigo, a city famous for its gold rush era wealth, and that display of wealth is all around us in the buildings and the heritage and the fountains and everything that most of the local people and most of the tourists are able to see. But what I want to do today is to highlight some of the history that's not so obvious, that doesn't have the sort of corporate backing or the fancy buildings to sort of point it out. So this is 5 historic sites in Bendigo that you may not know about. I'm in the Bendigo Creek and Golden Square, and this is the first location I want to talk about because this is where the gold history of Bendigo started. So the civil planners put the creek here into a channel to straighten things out and to open up space for housing and buildings. But if we wander down a little further, we can see the edge of the channeling here. Well, there's probably a little bit of the creek that might actually be something like its original position. And what's cool about this spot is in around here in 1851, Margaret Kennedy was doing her washing in the creek here, and she noticed little flecks of gold in the material as it was coming out. And what she didn't realise is she discovered one of the richest gold deposits in the world. So by winter of that year, there were about 800 people already living in the goldfields here trying their luck out. 10 years later, in 1861, there was something like 20,000 all living and working on what was become one of the wealthiest gold deposits in the world. The Bendigo deposits harvested over 500,000 tonne of gold, which in today's money is nearly $100 trillion Australian. And this is where it started. There's not much to see now, but history doesn't really care about aesthetics. And that's little known historical site number 1. So the city had a real issue in water. Basically, Bendigo sits at the head of a valley. There's no rivers nearby. There's only that little creek we've just seen. Water needed for mining and for consumption was in really short supply. Fortunately, due to the gold, money wasn't really an issue. Irish engineer Joseph Bradley was employed to try and find solutions for this, and he had 8 proposed reservoirs in the Bendigo area to assist. Basically, reservoir number 1 was built somewhere around the site of the gold discovery in 1859. This reservoir didn't really work and it leaked and was soon decommissioned. The number 7 reservoir, which you're looking at the moment, was built in 1861. It had a massive 270 million litre capacity. Plans for the other reservoirs were abandoned and they were never built. Joseph Bradley then in 1862 won a £500 prize from the government to design and build a 70-kilometre water channel system that brought water to this reservoir from Malmesbury. The channel itself was a huge engineering project, and it remains to this day the primary water source for the entire city. In 1873, they essentially duplicated the design and created the Crusoe Reservoir, which is probably 3 times larger than this one. Both of these are now open as public reserves. Crusoe has swimming and fishing, but the number 7, there's a lot more to see sort of from a historical perspective, and it's always a nice quiet spot to have a look at. So here you're looking at an object known as the basin, and it's a brick-lined bowl at the very highest point of the park where the water channel just enters. The use of this is a little bit debated. Some people think it was sort of a header tank for flushing out the systems and creating sort of an increased temporary supply of water. There's some evidence in the newspapers at the time that it might have been for firefighting purposes. That it gave the ability to increase the pressure for a short period of time, although the logistics of working that, when someone had to manually come up here and turn a tap, is a bit confusing. But still, it's a pretty cool relic. So that's site number 2, Crusoe Reservoir, by far the nicest of the places to visit, basically. This is site number 3. I'm outside the former Bendigo Gasworks. This was established, obviously, to supply gas to the Bendigo area. Established in 1860 in the pre-electricity era, so this would have provided gas for the street lamps as well as gas for heating, gas for cooking. In an era basically where you had to burn something to heat something. So chosen it because there's not many relics left of basically the industrial aspects of Bendigo. So because this was such a remote part of the world from an industrial point of view, and there's a lot of manufacturing, a lot of industry here in Bendigo, and this is one of the few relics that was left. So this gasworks stayed in operation up into the 1970s, so 110 years, over a century of operation, basically until natural gas supplies came in. So it's just a really cool relic. If you want to find it, it's just opposite Lake Weerona, which you can see behind me, which is also a nice little spot. So the gold rush brought people to Australia from all over the world. This open cut mine of Victoria Hill was owned by, or bought by, a German man called Belderset. Sorry for the pronunciation if you're German, and I'm sure I'm butchering that. He was an interesting character. He was actually a soldier who served in the Battle of Waterloo, presumably for the Prussian army. He'd already been to California in the California gold rush and made money over there. He came here, he bought the mining lease for this site off 2 other Americans and proceeded to work it and make incredible amounts of money. So the audio wasn't very good here, I'm going to talk over the top. Basically, the early phase of the gold rush in around Bendigo was what's called alluvial mining. So the gold was available just essentially in the soil free, and people could go and you could get lumps of soil, especially around creeks and waterways, and you could process it by running it through a cradle or a bit of water, or even just panning. You could get little flecks of gold and bits and pieces out of it. It wasn't long before most of the easy to get to gold had disappeared. So this is sort of the second phase here. This is an open cut gold mine. what they realized in Bendigo was a lot of the gold was trapped in quartz reefs. And if you had the ability to break up a quartz reef and get the gold out of it, there was a lot of gold sitting around there. What would have happened here is there would have been a quartz reef that was probably visible on the surface that was very, very close to the top. So basically they've cut through a great big open section of soil to get the quartz that was very close to the surface out. Now, the thing about this is it requires significantly more organisation. It requires more processing and it requires more mining. So this is sort of a next level of industrialisation of the process. After working the open cut mine, Alderstadt decided to take a risk and try and chase the deep-seated quartz reefs underground. And no one really knew whether there was going to be gold in these quartz reefs underground. So he sunk a shaft here and it went down to nearly 300 feet, 90 metres, before it found a huge gold deposit. Apparently this was celebrated. The Governor of Victoria at the time, Henry Barclay, came up to Bendigo and they had a champagne luncheon within the shaft itself in a deep cavern, illuminated by 1,200 gold candles. Alderstadt's credited basically with being the first to show that this was possible to get underground and to get these gold deposits profitably. This level of mining obviously required infinitely more engineering, money, time, coordination. So this is the remains of the Victoria Quartz Mining Company's mine here in Victoria Hill. So in 1908, this was the deepest mine shaft in the world. At that point, it was about 1,300 metres. And it went on to a maximum depth of 1,400 metres, nearly 1.5 kilometres under the ground. Ran from 1877 to 1913. As we said before, in 1908 it boasted the world's deepest mine shaft, an amazing 1,365 metres. The shaft would eventually reach a maximum depth of 1,406 metres in 1910. The mine was profitable for its whole time, but in 1910 water burst into the claim, possibly from another shaft, and flooded the entire shaft, halting operations. For 6 months they tried to bail the water out, but eventually had to give up. The top levels of the mine were sort of leased out to freeholders for a few years to get what they could out of it, but the operation had to close in 1913. So here's the poppet head. I'm kind of hoping the mine shaft might be open and we can see down with a really bright torch, but damn it, it's capped. Never mind, I'm sure it goes a long way. So the audio is a little bit rubbish and I'm just going to talk over the top. The cage behind me is one of the standard sort of miners' caves used in the era for these mine shafts, these deep mines. That was considered large enough for 4 miners. It was the main access to the shaft for both men and materials. You can imagine this was raised and lowered at up to 25 metres a second in the darkness. If you stick your arm out at the wrong place, it's getting ripped off and you're probably not going to survive. Absolutely terrifying. Those people were brave men. It's quite amazing to think of, really. You can see the spring mechanism at the top is designed to reach out and grab into the wooden rails on the side if the cable was to fail, which again is a little reassuring. So the crush behind me was part of a 1930s revitalisation of the shaft. During the Great Depression, labour costs dropped enormously and it became economically viable to start up some of the mining in around Bendigo again. This crush head is a great big row of hammers that were powered to stamp up and down and break up the quartz rock into finer pieces for processing. It was actually built just down the road in the 1930s at Castlemaine at Thompson's foundry. It was short-lived, but for a decade or so the mining industry really kicked off again in Bendigo, but most mining had ceased again by the 50s.
the White Hill Cemetery and I'm in the Chinese section, and I've chosen this as the fifth and final sort of lesser known historic site in Bendigo because it's one of the remnants of the Chinese heritage in Bendigo. Now, if you're a Bendigo resident, you know there's a lot of Chinese heritage here. We have a Dragons in the Easter Festival every year, we have a Chinese museum, we have celebrated Chinese families here. But what people don't realise is that as much of a third of the population from the Bendigo Goldfields, especially in the early days, were Chinese and of Chinese origin. The Chinese lived in particular communities, and there was one at White Hills, or just near here in the Thalys community, that was the largest in Bendigo, and up to 1,000 of the Chinese are buried here at this site.
So this is where we're on the map, right in the top right corner here. Towards the bottom, where I'm going to draw an arrow now, is the centre of Bendigo. And this great big complex of buildings here is the defence site. So it was a munitions factory. It's now Thalys site, where they manufacture various wonderful weapons. And that was originally the site of the Chinese camp, or one of the largest Chinese communities in Bendigo. A significant population of Chinese lived here for quite some time. Most of them had moved out, and the site was pretty much abandoned at the start of the 30s. And in the 40s, they started to build the defence factory there, having a sudden need for ammunition, etc. Right down the front is the Joss House, which is the last standing building from the old original Chinese settlement. The Joss House is a prayer, sort of multi-denominational prayer centre for Chinese.
There's not a lot else to see some places, but this is a nice reminder of the multicultural nature that was the Goldfields. People who come here from all over the world, and we tend to sort of historically whitewash our history, but there was very, very strong Chinese presence that should, to this day, be celebrated. Anyway, these are the 5 historic sites through Bendigo I wanted to highlight. I hope you've enjoyed it. I've tried to show sites that you probably wouldn't know about. Even if you're a local resident, you probably wouldn't know all the details about some of these sites. So anyway, welcome comments and the feedback. Thank you very much. Hello. That was 5 hidden historic sites in Bendigo. They're not truly secret sites, some of them are just lesser known, but I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've learned something out of it. I'd like to think that even if you're a local, you probably didn't know about all those sites and at least the full impact of them. So thank you very much. Like, subscribe, and we'll see if I can be bothered doing another one.